Okay, so our next session is going to be focused on what the country thinks. Has it changed its mind? Why might it have changed its mind? And what we can do with that information and how, if we do have a people's vote, people who have changed their mind will be a really important player in that. So we're joined by Peter Kellner, founder of YouGov, and the perfect authority in explaining to us what's happened over the last 2 years and why people might think how they do. And then we're going to move into a short discussion with two people who voted Leave but have since changed their mind, why they changed their mind and what they think we can do to make others see things their way too. So welcome to Peter's going to start speaking.
Thank you very much, Lara. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, just. There's a story out on Reuters in the last hour or two about a man called Crispin Odey. It may mean something to some people. He was one of the biggest funders of the Brexit campaign 3 years ago. And he's now saying he thinks that the UK will end up staying in the EU, and he's applying his hedge funds to buying up sterling because he thinks that sterling will appreciate when it's clear that we're going to stay in the EU. I think he's very wise to take this action. A calculation I did some weeks ago, which was shown on Channel 4 News last night. I hope you all watched it, because Femi was simply brilliant. What I did was look at the demographic change that happens. Roughly speaking, 700,000 people a year reach voting age, 600,000 people die. We know about the age profile of attitudes to Brexit, and to cut a long story short, you can show that simply on demographics alone, the Leave majority declines by just under 500,000 people a year. And given what the Leave majority was, I calculated that crossover day, the day when the Leave majority disappears, is 8 days from now. It's on. And I hope this will be marked, celebrated, and publicised appropriately. There is, of course, a margin of error of perhaps a week or two, but what I'm absolutely and seriously sure about is by March the 29th, even as I say, if nobody changes their mind, but simply on demographics, Britain will be a Remain country. The second point I want to make is that it's not the case that nobody's changed their mind, as we'll hear in a few minutes. And the latest polling that YouGov did, a very large sample for the People's Vote campaign, showed that now when you ask the generic question, Remain or Leave, question that's been asked for months, it's now 54% Remain, 46% Leave. And in the People's Vote sort of polling series, that's now the biggest margin. It's not as big as I'd like, but let nobody now say that there's been virtually no change, because the move from 48% Remain to 54% Remain, that's a 6-point swing. In general elections, there's only been one post-war election when the swing has been bigger than 6%. So a 6% shift is not to be sneezed at. But of course, if we do have a referendum, it won't be a generic question. It will, I hope, be a specific question. Do we want to remain in the EU or this version of Leave, whether it's the withdrawal agreement or Norway or crashing out without a deal? There will be a specific form of Leave on the ballot paper. And in our poll, we tested 2 of those options. And when we asked people how they would vote if it was Remain versus the withdrawal agreement, the Remain vote goes from 54 to 58%, 58-42, a 16-point gap. And when we ask, what about if it's Remain versus, I beg your pardon, I got that wrong. It's 58-42 for crashing out without a Leave. If you ask against withdrawal agreement, it's 63-37. It's actually a bigger majority when it's the compromise that is put to people, than when the, as it were, extreme option is put to people. And I think that's quite interesting, because one would normally expect the compromise position to be more popular than the extreme position. But in this case, and there's been a lot of polling by YouGov and others around the withdrawal agreement is simply not at all popular, even amongst Leave voters. So what you're getting is a polarization of public opinion between a figure for Remain, which has been rising, not as much or as fast as I'd like, but it's rising, and a much smaller but still substantial minority who want the purity of hard Brexit, and the withdrawal agreement is being squeezed in the middle. And the important point here is that if you look at referendums around the world, you often find that ahead of some big vote, people like the idea of change. But when you come to a decision about a particular form of change, quite a few people say, well, I like change, but I don't want that change. And I think that is what is now beginning to happen, and why, if we get to a second referendum and it's Remain versus a particular form of Leave, I think there should be a reasonably clear majority for staying in. If you want the best example that comes to mind is Australia 20 years ago, when they had a referendum on getting rid of the Queen as the head of state of Australia and having an Australian head of state. The polls showed consistently, yeah, great idea, majorities wanted it. When they came to the referendum, they had to say, well, if we get rid of the Queen as head of state, we will elect our own. It became clear that the person likely to be elected will be some kind of superannuated, second-rate, semi-retired politician. And the majority of Australians said, well, yeah, I'm not sure I want the Queen, but I certainly don't want that. And I think if we get to a referendum, that is a big clue to the battle we've got to fight. But let me offer one bit of warning, that the argument won't go away that this is some sort of negation of democracy. We've all heard it many times. Well, you know, this is the elite saying, we're going to keep on asking you till give the right answer, and so on. And although there are obvious, and we all know them, logical, intellectual responses to that, there is still, I fear, a visceral sense that a new referendum would somehow not be legitimate. And so, as we move forwards, we've got to make sure the framing of the argument is we frame it around this Leave being terrible for British people and British life, not being too defensive about the fact of the referendum. And if we are, and I wouldn't rule out losing a referendum. If we lose it, it'll be because, in my view, we lose the argument about democracy. One very, very final point. Let's have just a little bit of fun in this. I was in Washington last week, and I got here, you only have to read it. This is a tube of mints, and it's labeled Impeachment. And I suspect that is doing more good in the public debate around Trump than any of the more serious and complex arguments. So let's be confident. Let's fight with real spirit, not just Lara, but real spirit. But let's get a bit of humor and fun. You know, all my experience as a journalist and pollster, the more one can get some humor and fun into this, the more effective it can be. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Peter. I'm just going to let Femi ask a couple of questions now, because we don't have long.
Well, actually, Lara will ask the first question, but I just want to ask a framing question, just to start things off, which is, which half of the people of the United Kingdom is the enemy of the people of the United Kingdom?
Yeah.
My point is, we've been having this debate for 3 years on the basis that the other side is somehow an enemy of the people, even though we've forgotten that the reason why we're all so passionate about this issue is because we all care deeply about the future of the country, and we all care about the people in it. And the only difference between the two sides is whether or not something, let's not forget, that is highly technical will make life better for the people of this country. We are on the same side. It's simply the facts that we disagreed on. And so it's in that spirit that sorry, I keep using the word spirit, that we should continue the questions. So Lara first.
Okay, so I think we'll just start by asking, why did you vote leave?
Possibility. We were told we could have anything we wanted. We could have global Britain. We could have free trade deals with every country in the world. We could have immigration of highly skilled immigrants. When I voted to leave when I was 20 years old, when I was looking for a job in the finance sector. And I thought, this sounds great. I can go work in New York for 6 months. I can work in Paris for 3 months. We can have all the advantages of Europe and was not being constrained by it. More globalization, more Britain for the world. I was wrong. It was a lie. Douglas Caswell lied to me at my university. Mea culpa. And I can tell you now, a lot of people are feeling the exact same way.
I was very 50-50 I was going to actually vote during the referendum. And I felt quite scared by it all, to be perfectly honest. I found it very hard to get impartial information. The wonderful leaflet we were meant to get that I actually didn't get. Many people in my community were telling me, oh, it's EU funded, Cameron's been bought, you can't listen to those things. So it's very difficult. I'm also the mother of children who happen to have quite severe medical conditions. So to me, when someone is saying extra money for the NHS and frontline services, that was something that appealed to me. Another thing that appealed to me was that we'd be staying in the single market at least, as well as possibly the customs union fund negotiation. And I've always wanted a close relationship with the EU. I can't see how it would work any other way. So the day after the referendum, being nervous, Mr. Farage and Good Morning Britain comes up and says, that promise made by Vote Leave was actually a mistake. Great. But who is also suffering most? People who didn't even get a vote. I'm really concerned about the 5 million. They were made promises in 2016. And what's happened? Having to pay to stay in your own home. Friends of mine cry. We all have more in common. Nobody is an enemy. And people are forcibly being divided against each other to play us off whilst the clock is ticking. And I never voted for that.
And that's exactly the point. I mean, Emma's just pointed out that one of the reasons why you voted for Brexit is to help the NHS. Now, if leading members of the ruling party tell you that voting Brexit will help the NHS, and they point out, look, we send money to the EU, that money could be spent on the NHS, I'll tell you right now, I studied EU law for several years, I worked in EU affairs for several years, and when I saw that figure on that bus, it was a gut shot, because we all agree that the NHS is one of the best things, arguably the best thing about this country, because it shows that we all care enough about each other to contribute to make sure each and every one of us is okay. Now, and we all know how much it's struggling, so if there's a chance that it could be made better, that's something that we can all identify with. We want the same things. Now, the problem is the politicians who are in a position of trust and confidence, people who are supposed to be in the best position to tell us what sort of legal decisions will help us legally and medically, they lied. And whose fault is that? Politicians. Now, my question would be, what made you change your mind?
I think my heart and my head. First, it was my heart. I was in Brussels for a holiday in August 2017, and I was partying with Germans, Spanish, Dutch, Belgians, and we were all having such a great time, and I thought, how on earth can we leave this? And it just made me think, our destiny as British people, Britain, our destiny has always been in Europe. For the last 1,000 years, we have always been Europeans. So that was my heart. Then my head, I had to really think about where we were going, what this possible post-Brexit relationship could look like. Because I'd realized by then that this global Britain fantasy had been a huge lie. So now we face and we weren't going to get a free trade agreement with the European Union on any good terms because of the Irish border question. That can never be solved because technology does not exist, despite what some conspiracy theorists might tell you. So it's now, okay, we can have Donald Trump's America. That's who our next best bet is. And we're going to have Donald Trump's chlorinated chicken, Donald Trump's GMO. We're going to have American companies come and try to privatize our NHS. That is not what we voted for. That is not what I voted for, and it is a sham.
The people. Quite simply, the people. We are all one people, and I've always believed that. How could I not want to stand with everybody and protect their rights?
So you saw the risk to the 3 million and the 1.4 million across the channel as a reason what you realized that they weren't as protected as like Theresa Villiers and I think Daniel Hannan had said that they'd all be protected and no rights would change.
Correct.
You saw the risk to them and you thought this can't happen.
Yes, it's that simple. That's my line. I don't want people to be sacrificed. I don't want to be a pawn in a game. I don't want people being bargaining chips. Stop the games.
We're running slightly behind, so we're going to have to wrap that up there. But thank you so much to Femi and Peter, and thank you, Sim and Emma, for sharing your stories with us as well.